Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. You are now listening to season 7 of the show. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Annabel Pemberton. Annabel is the US growth lead and legal mind at Sparring. She is also the co-founder of Law School 2.0. Annabel completed her law degree at the University of Warwick with an Erasmus year at the University of Helsinki. She has also been an avid participant and judge in the Philip C. Jessup International Law Moot Court competition. Annabel has experience as a customer analytics consultant and deputy data protection officer at Bloomreach. In addition to all of this, she's also the super proud host and founder of the Wired Wig podcast. So a very warm welcome, Annabel.
Thanks for having me today, Rob. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And before we dive into all your amazing projects, experiences to date, we do have a customary opening question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality of the law on the scale of 1 to 10?
Wow. Okay. I mean, I haven't worked in corporate law in terms of being in a big firm. So firstly, just to put that out there, but I would say the drama from Suits itself, from what I've heard, because I'm not an avid watcher of Suits, is probably not so realistic. So probably 5. But I would say there's one scene when someone is flicking through a Barbary book and they're asking someone else to pull out quotes from the Barbary book. And that is kind of what it feels like to study for the New York bar. So if you're on that side and you're studying for US qualification rather than in the UK, then it does feel a little bit like that. But I think the rest of the show probably a solid 5.
Yeah, a solid 5. And that's actually what I've rated it before in the past. So we'll stick with 5 and we'll move swiftly on to talk all about you. So to begin with, Annabel, would you mind telling our listeners a bit about your background and your career journey?
Of course. So I studied at the University of Warwick. I did a 4-year law degree with a year abroad on Erasmus. And during that year abroad, I was actually in Helsinki in Finland. And the reason why I bring this up is because while I was there, I got really into the intersection of law and technology. The University of Helsinki, they have an amazing program that includes different courses, including the intersection of AI and technology. So this was around 5 years ago when I was there, and they were even looking at this then. So I can't imagine what the courses would be like now, given how everything has changed in the profession. But that really gave me the insight of how the profession was changing. And I started to think, okay, so maybe I don't actually want to be a more conventional solicitor or even be a lawyer. I started reading a lot of other literature around this. So that was when I came across 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐿 and read about like the future of the profession, or now the current version of the profession, and started to plan what I wanted to actually do in the future. Interestingly, this didn't lead me down the legal innovation path. It actually led me to look at other opportunities outside of law, because the way I saw it was, okay, so trainees in the future will be doing, will there be a need for trainees in the future? Because a lot of the tasks that they're doing now, they will be automated. And that was how I saw it. So I thought, well, maybe it's not so valuable for me to be a trainee in a firm. And in case that is like ever taken out of context, I don't mean that in a way that it's still very valuable to be a trainee in a firm. Absolutely. But just at that time, it really felt that there was this gap of what do we do with these people, where we could actually automate those tasks that they're doing. And it seemed like quite an uncertain future from that perspective. So I actually went and worked for a data startup called 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐿 back then. And that was when I really discovered the tech world, the startup world, and that people had kind of projects outside of work and they were doing other things other than their main career. So I had a fantastic time there. I saw the ups and downs of the startup world. And I was there until they were acquired in the beginning of 2021. So I was working, I started as an intern there, joined in 2018 when they actually had, when GDPR came into force. So I was there at the right time to actually assist them with helping them implement GDPR and help clients that they were working with in terms of their customers' data, making sure that it was held compliantly. So when I was still studying in my final year at Warwick, I was working part-time remotely for the startup as a deputy data protection officer. And then I continued that when I was actually, after I'd graduated. So I did that for a year and a half until the acquisition. And then afterwards, I realized, okay, I will join the firm that I'm at now. That is called Sparring, and we just exclusively focus on working with technology startups. What I would say happened in between, because of this kind of exposure to doing projects outside of work, I started to create my own podcast. So this was called the Wired Wig. And because of what I was seeing inside Exponia was that lawyers didn't really understand what was happening with the tech. So I wanted to try to bridge the gap. I also had a lot of friends who they wanted to learn more about tech. They wanted to learn more about the careers that were available to them. They were just a bit intimidated by the space. And I had gone through that when I did my internship at Exponia. I had some very awkward weeks when I didn't understand the language that people were speaking. I didn't understand the terms. So I just felt a bit out of place there because people also just kept on asking me why I was there and why I wasn't doing legal experience. So I just wanted to help bridge that gap for other people so they didn't feel that too. So I was interviewing people who were already in tech, getting them to explain how the technology works and then trying to add the legal angle. And then this also went down the legal and innovation, legal tech route, where I was also speaking to legal tech providers as well. So the Wired Wig, we haven't actually done episodes for quite some time now because I've been busy with Law School 2.0, which came out of the Wired Wig because I interviewed Amy, and then Amy introduced me to Nathan. And we essentially noticed that we really wanted to go deeper into this problem of connecting law students with opportunities in legal innovation and legal technology, which is what we currently do with Law School 2.0 and the Legal Tech Education Scheme. So, sorry, Rob, that was probably a bit too long. That's the journey.
No, that was perfect. And thank you for sharing that, because it's a really interesting journey, and your rationale and your thinking. And I think researching early into the industry and being informed, and then making maybe better decisions for you in terms of where you think your interest would lie for a career. I think there's some real wisdom you shared there. So thanks for that. And obviously, you then had an international stint in the University of Helsinki. So some really good insights. So thanks for sharing that. I want to talk about some of the other things you're involved with, because you have been a participant and judge in the 𝐬𝐻𝐸 International Law Moot Court competition. Can you tell us more about that particular competition?
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that up. That was such a great time of my time at university. I loved mooting so much, and I was really lucky that I sort of fell into mooting in my first year. Actually, when I was at school, I did mock trial, so I already had that experience, and it is fairly different to mooting, but I knew I enjoyed it. And when I arrived at Warwick, when during freshers, I was already signing up for the mooting, and I didn't really touch negotiation because I was just very set on becoming a barrister at that point. So I thought, okay, mooting is the best path for me. And essentially, I remember doing my first few moots and thinking I was really bad at it, and thinking this has gone really awfully. And then I received the email that both my partner and we had actually progressed to the next round, and then the next round, and then we were finally in the semi-finals for the first year moot. So it turned out that actually grown a lot from the first moot that we'd done together. And I really found myself growing a lot as a speaker through mooting as well. And I genuinely enjoyed it. So I genuinely enjoyed doing the research, actually presenting the points. I quite like the kind of the ways that you need to say things in a moot as well. So it's very old fashioned, and that's not what actually happens. But I liked that structure of it. It kind of gave you something to aspire to, and watching these videos online on how other people would move. So I was just doing this at the local level. And then one of the reasons why I went to Helsinki as well was because I knew they'd actually did the international moots as well. So they actually had a space moot at that time that I was more interested in. So I interviewed for the space moot, and they asked if I wanted to be part of the 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐿 team. And I remember at the time just being so, I didn't know what to say because I just thought like the best of the best would go to 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐿, and I just really honestly didn't feel like I was good enough to go. But it was a great opportunity because I was only just young, only just old enough to go to the US and go to the bar where they announce the results, because you have to be 21 to be there. So I was fairly young in terms of being a contestant during that time, but I also made several connections in the US. I would say this is also, and it's hard to discuss it now because Erasmus I know is very different after Brexit, and I'm not so sure how it would work these days. But at least with studying in Helsinki, there was a nice rule that in countries where only one university is participating from the country, you automatically go to the World Championships. So I'm completely exposing myself here. Normally, how it works is that you have local rounds. So if you actually participate in the local round in the UK, you need to go to London. And I did that the following year. And it's very tough, also very fun, but you need to go through those rounds before you go to Washington, D.C. In Finland, we didn't have that. We just went straight to Washington, D.C. So we did a lot of rounds with previous contestants, previous judges. So we had our grilling like that, but we didn't have that whole process with other teams. So we knew we were going, but I got a lot out of how I saw US students doing that advocacy as well. And then, yes, so after when I came back to Warwick, I told them that I'd done the 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐿 International Moot and that it would be great to also have a team from Warwick. And I helped form the team while I was there and had an amazing sponsor from the University of Warwick who was really putting the message out there that we should have a team going and that it was an important cause. So we had five of us who went to London, and the university supported us in going there. And we competed, we made it to the quarters. We didn't get to go to DC, but I would say that the experience of actually competing against universities in the UK was unlike any other experience I got during my law degree. So yeah, the 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐿 Moots, I would definitely recommend doing it if you have the opportunity. It's very scary. I never got past the experience of sitting there waiting to go up and plead and feeling like I wanted to run out of the room because I get very nervous during these things, but it's all how you learn to utilize these nerves and that excitement, and it can teach you a lot of life lessons. And when I judge now, I'm always very conscious of that because I was a participant for 2 years. And then I just was again in the right place at the right time. That the friendly rounds for Europe were in Prague the following year, and I was living in Prague by that point. So I applied to be a judge. I was accepted, and I was judging alongside actual judges, which was a great experience because then I got to also stay in touch with them.
I think that's incredible, and again, there's lots of great little nuggets in there, and like you said, just ending, the opportunity to sit next to very highly qualified and experienced people by doing something slightly extracurricular, something that's going to build your profile. So thank you for sharing that and those experiences you've got. You mentioned previously, we need to talk about it in more detail, that you are the co-founder of Law School 2.0. For people who might be less familiar, can you explain what it is?
Sure, of course. So, Law School 2.0 is an educational platform where we're helping upskill law students and lawyers in how to use technology in practice. So, let's unpack what that actually means in practice. So, what this includes is the Legal Tech Vacation Scheme, which is a 5-day event where we have 3 days of skills progression. And so this is completely free, it's online. And during those first 3 days, we take attendees through from actually identifying problems in a law firm or a company or wherever they're working. The second day is focusing on building the solution, and the third day is focused on adoption, and actually getting buy-in from more senior teams. And then the final 2 days, it's a hackathon where we give you a problem statement, normally from an actual company or a law firm, and it's actually what their problem they're actually currently facing. And then the solution is, it's not completely built. We're not expecting people to code, but we're expecting attendees to go through these skills that we've taught them over the three first days. So we have a number of speakers who come in, and they're the leaders in that area, and they're running a small talk. And then we have some breakout sessions and some more practical sides of the legal tech vacation scheme. So we ran this for the second time last summer, and we'll be running it again towards the end of this year. So this is one part of Law School 2.0. The other part is we have just recently released a course in cooperation with iManage and Barbary. So this is available for free. So we've we've just launched it. So if you are interested, then do feel free to take a look and give us feedback, because we want to make sure it's the best it can be. Because when we first started putting all of our ideas together on how we can really improve technology education for lawyers, whether they're already practicing or they're still studying, what we noticed is there just wasn't this focus on education that wasn't focused on one type of technology, but was focused more on the mindset. So this course, it does go deeper into those different elements. So how to identify the specific stakeholders who this problem is affecting, how to actually think about personas, how to actually create a solution that's going to solve a problem rather than chasing the technology. So we ended up basically creating a course which is an extended version of the scheme that we're running every year, and it's on demand. But again, still early days, so we want to get as much feedback as possible. And then the third element is we have also just released an internship and a jobs board to connect law students with those opportunities in legal innovation and legal tech. We're really seeing at the moment there's a huge change in legal with legal innovation and technology. So we really want to make sure that we're connecting students to those opportunities. And this was actually the original idea of Law School 2.0. But doing what we say, we went on Clubhouse initially to build Law School 2.0, and we asked students what they missed from their legal education. And the feeling from that was that we should focus on actually how to look at problems. And that was how the Legal Tech Vacation Scheme was born. And we wanted to do this first, build a community, get more feedback around this, really make that the best it could be. And then the connector part, it came very naturally because of all the changes with ChatGPT recently and the focus on generative AI. I'm getting more students again writing to me asking, and do you have any opportunities, for example? So it came around to that. So I would say that there's these three things under Law School 2.0, but overall the overarching focus is on upskilling lawyers and law students into how they can be the lawyers of tomorrow and use technology properly in practice.
And I think you do a tremendous job, and I think it's just absolutely needed, the content and the work that you're doing, and I absolutely fully support it. I'm a huge fan of Law School 2.0 and would encourage people to go and take some of those free courses and learn more and connect with Annabel and really double down, particularly if you want to be, up to speed with what the way, it's changing, like you've just mentioned there in a couple of sentences, from where we were when we're talking now about generative AI and, the next stage, the next stage, the next stage. I think being in those communities, you're only going to learn. But as of now, Annabel, you are the US growth lead and legal mind at Sparring. So what type of organization is Sparring? What does your role involve?
Of course, so Sparring is a law firm. We're in particular a boutique law firm that just focuses on technology startups, particularly when they're very early stage, so pre-seed, seed stage. And in the US in particular, we're helping technology startups really grow through their first few steps. So whether that's incorporation, data protection, finding the right jurisdiction that they should be based in, whether it's gaining investment. We also really help with scaling. So Sparring was actually first started in Bratislava in Slovakia. And the need there was that a lot of European companies, they actually are looking to incorporate in the US, but maybe they actually started that idea and they incorporated locally. And then they need help being the entity being flipped to the US. So we do a lot of Delaware flips where you're essentially moving the IP over to a US entity. So this is one way that we actually first built the law firm. I joined Sparring when there were around 10 of us, and this was 2.5 years ago. And there's now around 50 of us working for Sparring. So it's been a pleasure to be part of a law firm that's been growing so fast and actually being part of that growth as well. So the main reason why I'm out here in the US, in particular in San Francisco, is to help build our practice out here in the States, because of course there's so much talent here and just the new ideas and the opportunities, and just to see how it goes. So we actually have been out in the US for around 2 years already, but we've been focusing more on LA and in general helping European and UK startups scale to the US, whereas now the change is actually focusing on gaining US first startups as well. And that's my job while I'm out here.
And I think it's a great job. And I want to stick with the startups, if I may. What do you think are some of the biggest legal challenges facing tech startups today? And how do you help clients navigate those?
Okay, that's a great question. I think it also depends on the location. I would say in the US, unfortunately, right now with a lot of the technology layoffs, flip side of this is when you are laying someone off in the US, there it is very easy to let someone go, but it's also very easy for an employee to sue the company. So unfortunately, there are a lot of discrimination claims, many actually being legit, some maybe not, and distinguishing those is tricky. From our side, we sometimes need to support our clients with cases such as this, so that can happen sometimes. So that's the more negative side. I mean, as a lawyer, it's the worst part of the job because sometimes for a company to scale, this is the necessary means to do so because they have a short runway, so they don't have so much money left, and this is the last thing they want to do, but it's the only way for them to survive is that they need to cut the team. So sometimes we do need to help with this, and I think that's a huge challenge at the moment is resource allocation here in the US. I would say in Europe, it's also saying it's more staying competitive, staying up to date, especially being out here. I'm noticing how far behind sometimes we are in the UK around as well, and as well as the as in the EU. So it's important to keep up to date with also what's happening in the US. And I would say if you are in the legal tech vertical right now, just to keep on top of like looking to not even 2 years in the future, maybe even like one to 2 years in the future with how innovation is changing, because I really feel that we're on the precipice of change in the legal industry with how innovators actually fit into the structure, whether it's legal techs on the side or innovation departments directly in law firms. So just as a side point for legal tech startups. So from the US perspective, it's more about managing this time at the moment and surviving as a startup. It's also really managing your resources in the best way from the perspective that there was a lot of funding around a year and a half ago. We had a year where we were helping with investment round after investment round, and we were so busy because we always had a very small team, so we were also trying to hire more lawyers. So it was great to be working with so many successful startups, but then I remember we had a lot of very long days because we were just trying to get the investments through and get them signed. And unfortunately right now there aren't so many, there are investments happening, but it's just not as frequent as it used to be. So actually gaining investment is a bit more, it's harder these days, but I would say it's not impossible. There's definitely many willing investors out there. There's a lot of accelerators, a lot of programs where you can find investment in it, and then they would actually take equity, which you can do if that's an option for you. There are still ways to actually raise for your startup, but it is a bit tougher than it was around a year ago.
I would agree, but I think, like you rightly say, I think with the right people around you and the right mindset, it is still absolutely achievable. Time for a short break from the show. Calling all lawyers who want to work smarter, not harder. Are you tired of following old processes just because? Or do you feel like your current setup is letting you down? Then I recommend you try 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐿, the legal software that streamlines your workflow and keeps your entire firm organized. With 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬's cloud-based legal software, you can quickly and easily manage your cases, billing, documents, and calendar all from one place. They've even got an easy-to-use mobile app, so you can stay on top of your cases wherever you go. Join the tens of thousands of legal professionals worldwide who trust 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐿 for all of their legal needs. It's the legal software that works for the modern law firm. Dive in, start using it right away with their 7-day free trial. Sign up now at 𝐥𝐢𝐬𝐿.com/legally speaking. That's CLIO.com/legally speaking. Now back to the show. I want to carry on this sort of theme and kind of blend in your experiences, because you've mentioned, we've talked about, you were in, worked in data protection, you've got an understanding of startups, so data privacy law. And I always say, data is the new gold. How do you think the increasing focus on data privacy and security will shape future of the tech startup industry, and what can startups perhaps think about to prepare for these changes?
Of course, and I would say I'm still thinking about this from the perspective of generative AI, for example, because it's so tempting to go to ChatGPT and to use it however you like, but you have to be so conscious that understanding how this technology works, that it's learning based on what others have used it for in the past. So you have to be incredibly careful with what personal data. Well, no personal data can go into ChatGPT. That's the line, but you need to be careful with the data that you're putting into something like this as well. What I would say though is I've always taken the perspective that being compliant, having security in place, making sure that you have all of the privacy checks and you're really having it at the forefront of your mind as a founder is a huge competitive advantage over other startups in your space. And the reason for this is if you want to grow to the enterprise level, this is something that will always come up. So again, when I was at Exponia, it was something that we were scaling. I joined when there were around 150 of us, 120 of us, and saw us grow to 300, where we were working with a lot of large telcos and banks. And it takes a lot of time and trust to work with these industries, but they're very, very strict on security and privacy. And you need to have these certifications like SOC 2, ISO 27001, so like these very specific certifications, but they're very common across the industry. And if you don't respect that and you don't look into that and invest time and money that way, then your competitor will. So I think it's more about taking the dryness that some people see in it out of it and making it more like, look, we actually care about your data and we're taking steps to make sure that you can use our platform in a compliant way. Of course, this is going to be more or less about an importance or more or less genuine depending on the industry you're in. But particularly if you're handling, from my perspective, if you're handling personal data anyway, then it should be a priority. But in particular, if you're handling health data, there's a huge opportunity for you to really think about that because you need to be compliant anyway. But if you're saying to people like, look, we really care about your data and we really want to make sure that you feel comfortable using our platform, and these are the steps that we've taken, it's surprising to see how few platforms actually really go into that. So I think it's framing it as rather than this is something that we have to do, it's more of a way, it's an advantage for you to get ahead of your competitors and really learn more about your customers that way.
I love that. I love that positive mindset. How it's true, isn't it? I think if you actually get all of these things in a row, and you are going to be leaps and bounds ahead of the competition. I guess that lends to what I was going to ask you next in terms of staying ahead and looking forward. What are you most excited about? What are the exciting new developments in the tech startup space that you're really excited about?
Oh, that's great. That's great. I mean, so this isn't happening yet, but I will be very excited when there is a new browser that does not focus on cookies, because this maybe goes back to my more focused data protection times, and I still do a lot of data protection at Sparring, just to say that as well. And I still love doing it, walking through products with different founders. But what I would say would be amazing is if there is a kind of new kind of browser or a new way to search the internet that isn't relying on trackers in the way we know them now. I just feel that cookies have become so obsolete in the way that as users we just ignore those cookie banners, we just click accept, deny, we just want them kind of gone because they're just so distracting and obtrusive to the whole experience. And finding a way that actually really enhances your journey in using the internet while also allowing companies to understand how they can improve their services, but still making the experience good for you. And I'm sure we're also, again, on the edge of technology that can do this in a better way. And maybe it's not even the new tech, maybe it's just rethinking how everything is actually structured, why we actually initially went for trackers and cookies in this way. But I'm sure there can be a combination of existing technologies, create something like this, and it could be a huge game changer because it would just change the interface of how people are being tracked in one way, and actually for companies to learn more about how they're actually using the platform, but actually for that user to also learn more about their habits online. So when I'm saying about tracking, I'm seeing it from two perspectives rather than the perspective that's spoken a lot about in the media of tracking that is very mm, more company centric and selling data, for example. And actually, one interesting idea I heard quite recently is how wallets, for example, could be used in this way. And so I'd never thought about crypto wallets from this perspective. I'd always thought about the things that you put inside them and NFTs and cryptocurrencies. And honestly, for me, I'm still struggling a bit with NFTs because I don't necessarily see the utility in them, and I'm just still quite not there with seeing that. But with the wallets, what I was discussing with someone was actually how this could be the new identifier. So instead of having your IP address, instead of having your cookie, you have your wallet, which is your personal identifier for how you actually go around the internet, how you're actually interacting with different interfaces in the digital world, online and offline. And of course, this gives rise to many privacy implications, and that type of data, we need to be incredibly sensitive about it. But the other side of this is that it could be a less obtrusive way to actually track people because you have control over your wallet. You can be using something called a non-custodial wallet, which means that you would have control over the keys, and then the ownership of that would be very different to how companies are currently tracking our data. Because yes, that does benefit us. It means we actually receive more personalized advertisement. In theory, you can actually find things easier online. We receive a better service. But the other side of that is that we don't necessarily know how the data is being used by these companies in practice and the actual sheer quantity of data. So, long-winded way of saying it, but I think the technology of wallets in the crypto space, it could have a further application that we're currently just not seeing. And if that would be something that would become available across the board, I think that could be really exciting.
And I agree. And as most people listen to me on the show, I'm a big fan of Web3 decentralization, wallets, crypto, and just using all of this new technology for good to give people more ownership, more control, put the power back in the people, particularly with all of this. But absolutely, you're right, though, it's not as straightforward as that. There are a lot of considerations and legal considerations. And that's why lawyers are going to be very busy now and sort of moving forward. So let's talk about podcasting now, because we have touched on it, but you are the founder and podcast host, as you mentioned, of the Wired Wig. What inspired you to launch the podcast? I know you mentioned a bit about it earlier, and what are sort of some of the topics you've covered over recent times?
Of course. So the main initial inspiration was because I saw this education gap between lawyers and developers. I just remembered I had this moment when I was working on a project during this internship at Exponia where I really felt that everything that the developer was saying to me was another language. I just had to ask a question about every single term they were using. And I also just felt that they didn't have so much confidence in me because I was asking all of these questions. I mean, looking back now, they were probably completely fine to answer those questions because that's just the mentality here in the tech space, is that you always ask questions because it's better to be curious than to be confused. So it's better for you to have the certainty than just not know what's going on at all. But honestly, I just felt a bit ashamed of that. And I wanted to really make sure that other law students had the opportunity to really take these tools and go into a profession, into an industry that they could really thrive in. So, what I then took away from that was okay, the issue I had was I wasn't so comfortable with the technology. I didn't know the language and the terminology of what developers were using on the day to day. So let's try to create a resource that's really going to demystify this in quite a fun way, while also just exploring the different opportunities that are out there. and let's just see. So this was also in 2020. So I launched this in March 2020. I'd had this idea in my head for a few months before, but I just hadn't had the time to sit down. Of course, when everything just slowed down in the world, I had a bit more space to think a podcast would be a nice place for this. Let's give it a try. So at first, I was really interviewing the people who I'd been working with. So I remember interviewing Stephen Hamill, and I'd been working with him on data protection directly at Exponia. I'd met him at a data conference, and we spoke about different ways that people were being tracked via their phones during COVID. So we were speaking about triangulation of phone networks, and different ways that your phone was actually being used unexpectedly without you knowing. So it was also about using the podcast in a way to teach other people who weren't necessarily law students, but other people just in society who are interested about the implications of technology and the legal implications this can have on you. So actually through my Instagram at one point I was sharing more videos around how to use technology in a way that can sort of protect yourself. So again, like around when there were several demonstrations in the UK and the US, I did an episode on facial recognition and how there's bias in facial recognition. And I'm going to say there is still bias now because it's something that is going to take years to get out of the system just because of how this technology has been built. But that bias could lead to incorrect identification and people being arrested who actually weren't who they actually were, and facial recognition being used in places where people weren't informed it was being used. And I felt that this channel was also a great place, in addition to helping lawyers really have the best career they can have, actually educate people on how technology really affects society. So I got very passionate about this area. So in the end, around 40 episodes were created for the Wired Wig, and it's something that I would love to pick up again in the future, but I just haven't had the time over the last few months because of just working directly in a law firm. It's like a little bit different to working directly in a startup. But it's something that I would really love to pick up again because it's always such a pleasure to speak to guests. And Rob, I'm sure you have it too. Like you always learn so much when you're interviewing someone,
Yeah.
and then you just come away with some wisdom yourself, and you know you're going to be sharing it with your audience.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm a big fan of the show, and I think you've had some incredible guests, and yeah, absolutely. When time permits, it'll be great to see some more episodes in the future. And it's amazing how much you can get through in a show as well. Before we let you go, though, I want to just a couple of final points because in your interview with the student lawyer, you shared that you are not pursuing the conventional UK training contract route. I do not have a defined path or a seats structure inside the firm. So, what do you think some of the advantages of pursuing an unconventional training contract route are?
You're really good at questions, Rob. Like you've really done your research. So, and actually, that student lawyer article, Zainab, who worked with us for Law School 2.0, who was volunteering with us, she asked me to write something there. So that was also such a lovely experience and a full circle moment. But what I would say is, so first out, I think it's important for you to know whether you want to have a more structured experience or an unstructured experience when you're qualifying and learning to be a lawyer, because there are pros and cons to both. Of course, you're going to expect more of a structured approach if you go to the Magic Circle. You're going to do your vacation scheme, and then you'll do your training contract. You know how many seats you'll have. You kind of know which seat you're going to go to. You have this predictability and your stability. I haven't gone through this myself, so it's hard for me to comment on the cons, but from what I can imagine, what I've heard from other people is that you are quite stuck in these different seats in what you can do. You need to be in that seat for so many months. So even if you're not enjoying it or the work just doesn't fit you, then you can't really move because you're in this structure. What I would say is the benefit of doing something like I have so I'm qualifying as a New York attorney. So I went through the accelerated Barbary program online and then went to the States to actually sit for the exam. It's actually, in comparison to the SQE, it's a little bit faster to do it this route as well. And especially if you're supported by a firm, then the cost will be covered. I would say that's the only thing is that you need to get to the US. That's probably your biggest cost is flying there and the accommodation. And then you also have the cost of the Barbary course. So when you actually weigh up the costs, it's probably pretty similar to do either path. But the other side of this is from the structural perspective, is I have been qualifying at the same time as working with clients being supervised. And from what I understand in your training contract, that's not necessarily the case. That with each seat, you do get exposure to clients, but you're changing each time. Whereas with my journey, I've been able to actually be responsible as the client manager for individual clients or clients I actually bring into the firm. So I have this more like partner relationship with some of the clients, even though I'm so early in my career, just because we don't have such a hierarchy in Sparring from this perspective. So it's still acknowledged that I'm a junior lawyer, we're compliant from the regulatory perspective, but it still means that I can have a role in sales, I can have a role in marketing. I was able to have this hybrid role, so half of my time was dedicated to doing marketing for the firm and leading the marketing for the firm, whereas the other half was actually put towards qualifying as a lawyer, actually doing my legal work and being supervised in this case. But it just gives you far more freedom. And if you're someone who's a bit like me, you prefer to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, a little bit more innovative, then I think going down the unstructured route is probably something for you to consider. I definitely have friends who they would work in a firm like Sparring where there isn't so much structure, and it wouldn't be for them because they wouldn't know how to leverage that. They wouldn't know how to seek like the opportunities because you really need to take ownership of your education. And that's something that you don't need to do so much when you have more structure. So yes, I would say the benefits are really that you can shape it into how you want it to be. So for example, for me, I got to choose that I wanted to be a US attorney rather than a UK lawyer. And actually that you can take on these more business focused roles rather than legal.
Yeah, and thank you for giving such, again, great insights to, how people might be thinking about, routes and angles and ways to get into the profession. So just before we wrap up, what would be your sort of final piece of advice, one piece of advice for those interested in pursuing the unconventional training contract route or indeed a unique legal tech role? What would be that one piece of advice you would share?
I would say stay curious. Do not be afraid to come across that you don't know something. Actually, be very confident about that and go into that with conviction. No one knows everything. And a lot of the tech people that you'll come across, they also don't know that much about law. So there's like two sides to this. So stay really curious even after university. I feel a lot of people they stop learning when they leave university and they maybe get into more repetitive tasks in their job. You can just learn, you can continue to learn by listening to podcasts, reading different books that you wouldn't normally read, but just stay really interested in these different topics because you just never know which doors they're going to open for you. Personally, for me, with data protection, the security side, I never would have thought that I would go that way or go into data protection. But for me, it's actually brought so many opportunities. And also it's an area that I'm actually very, very interested in. And that wouldn't have started if I had been really scared of going more towards that technological path. So, yep, just if you have any hesitation, then think, is this going to push me towards learning something new and understanding this technology more? And if so, then you should just go for it, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, staying curious. Love that. Okay, if our listeners, which I'm sure they will, Annabel, because you shared loads of great insights today, would like to know more about your journey or Sparring or the Wired Wig, where can they find out more?
Of course. So actually on my LinkedIn, there is a link in my bio now that actually has a link to everything. So you can learn more about Sparring. So the main website is sparring.io. You can learn more about the Wired Wig podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the main podcast platforms. And then you can also learn more about Law School 2.0. The website is linked there too.
Awesome. This just leads me to say thank you so much, Annabel. It's been an absolute blast having you on the Legally Speaking podcast. So from all of us for now, wishing you lots of continued success with your future career and pursuits. But for now, over and out. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content here, why not check out our world-leading content and collaboration hub, the Legally Speaking Club, over on Discord. Go to our website, www.legallyspeakingpodcast.com, for the link to join our community there. Over and out.